Imagine a guy who has everything going for him on the outside. He is tall, incredibly handsome, and comes from a wealthy family. If you walked into your school today, he would be the one everyone looked at. This was Saul, the son of Kish. But Saul did not start his story looking for power or a throne. He started it looking for lost donkeys. His father had lost some animals, and Saul spent days trekking through the hill country with his servant, probably exhausted and ready to give up. Just when he was about to head home, his servant suggested they talk to a local man of God, a seer named Samuel. Saul did not even know who Samuel was, which shows you how much of an outsider he felt like. Samuel, however, had been expecting him. God had whispered in Samuel's ear that a man from the tribe of Benjamin would arrive, and that he was the one chosen to lead the people. Samuel threw a feast for Saul, gave him the best cut of meat, and the next morning, as they walked to the edge of town, Samuel poured oil over Saul's head and told him he was now the leader of Israel. This was a massive deal because Israel had never had a king before. They were a loose collection of tribes constantly being bullied by their neighbors, especially the Philistines. Saul was supposed to be the game changer. At first, it seemed like he might be. When Samuel gathered everyone together to pick the king by drawing names, Saul was so nervous that he literally went and hid among the baggage. Imagine the most powerful man in the country hiding behind soup cases because he was shy. But when he stood up, he was a head taller than everyone else, and the people went wild, shouting, "Long live the king!" His early days were full of hero moments. When an enemy group called the Ammonites threatened to gouge out the right eye of every person in the city of Jabesh-Gilead, Saul didn't hesitate. The Spirit of God rushed upon him, and he gathered a massive army and crushed the Ammonites. He was a warrior king who finally gave Israel a sense of security. But the higher you climb, the harder you can fall. And Saul's problem was not his strength, it was his heart. He started to care more about what people thought of him than what God thought of him. The first crack in the foundation happened when he was waiting for Samuel to show up and offer a sacrifice before a big battle. Samuel was late, and Saul's soldiers started deserting because they were scared. Instead of waiting and trusting, Saul took matters into his own hands and offered the sacrifice himself, which was a huge no-no for a king. When Samuel finally arrived, he told Saul that because he had been impatient and disobedient, his family would not keep the throne. The second big mistake happened during the war with the Amalekites. God had given Saul very clear instructions to destroy everything. But Saul decided to keep the best sheep and cattle for himself and spared the enemy king, Agag. When Samuel confronted him, Saul tried to make excuses, even blaming his soldiers for the decision. Samuel's response was one of the most famous lines in the Bible. To obey is better than sacrifice. That was the turning point. The sources tell us that the Spirit of the Lord left Saul, and he was plagued by a distressing spirit that made him moody, paranoid, and angry. This is where the story of Saul and David overlaps. To help Saul feel better, his servants brought in a young shepherd boy named David to play the harp. At first, Saul loved David like a son, but that love turned into a poisonous jealousy. When David killed the giant Goliath, and the crowd started singing that David was a greater hero than Saul, something snapped. Saul spent the rest of his life chasing David through the wilderness, trying to kill the very person who was his most loyal soldier. It was a tragic downward spiral, a man losing his grip on everything. His own son, Jonathan, became best friends with David. His daughter, Michal, helped David escape. Saul eventually became so paranoid that he ordered the execution of 85 priests because he thought they were helping David. He was isolated, lonely and haunted. They hid the king at a place called Mount Gilboa. The Philistines had gathered a massive army, and Saul could not hear God's voice anymore. No dreams, no prophets, nothing. In total desperation, Saul disguised himself and went to see a medium, a witch, even though he had earlier made a law banning them. He asked her to call up the spirit of the dead Samuel. The ghost of Samuel appeared, but gave no comfort. It told Saul that the next day, Saul and his sons would be dead and Israel would be defeated. The next day, it all happened exactly as Samuel said. Saul's sons, including the brave Jonathan, were killed in battle. Saul himself was badly wounded by archers. Rather than being captured and tortured by his enemies, Saul fell on his own sword. It was a tragic end for a man who had started with so much potential. The very people he had rescued at the start of his reign, the men of Jabesh Gilead, risked their lives to go and get his body and give him a proper burial. They remembered the hero he had once been, even if the rest of his life had been a series of heartbreaking mistakes. Saul was a king who had the look of a leader, but lacked the heart to follow the one who had chosen him.